Our wonderful planning team members are chairing these sessions, and I'd like to just introduce Deb Palmer and Liz Hathaway-Castellan, who are co-chairing this session. Deb Palmer from the University of Colorado at Boulder will be introducing our speaker.
Good morning. I have the honor of introducing Dr. Patricia Gándara to you this morning. Patricia Gándara is a research professor of education and the co-director of the Civil Rights Project at UCLA. She's also the chair of the Working Group on Education for the University of California, Mexico initiative, in which she's spearheading a number of California-Mexico education projects. Gándara is a fellow of the American Education Research Association, the National Academy of Education, the Rockefeller Foundation Bellagio Center in Italy, the French-American Association at Sciences Postgraduate Institute in Paris, and an ETS fellow at Princeton, New Jersey. In 2011, she was appointed to President Obama's Commission on Educational Excellence for Hispanics, and in 2015, she received the Distinguished Career Award from the Scholars of Color Committee of the American Education Research Association. She works at the juncture of policy and emergent bilinguals in the United States and in Mexico, and with a particular passion for educational equity and access for low-income and ethnic minority communities. She's recently been exploring the implications of ESSA, the Elementary and Secondary Schools Act, and restrictive language policies that continue in California and Arizona, although we're hopeful that California may actually reverse their restrictive language policies this fall. She is an extremely prolific writer, and let me just name a few of her recent books. In 2009, The Latino Education Crisis with Francis Contreras. In 2010, Forbidden Language, English Learners and Restrictive Language Policies with Megan Hopkins. And then in 2014, with my UT colleague, Rebecca Callahan, The Bilingual Advantage, Language Literacy and the U.S. Labor Market, which is what she's, I think, primarily going to be talking about with you today. I had the honor, as I said, of counting Rebecca Callahan as my close colleague at UT Austin, so I heard plenty about what an astounding and supportive mentor and colleague Patricia Gándara is. I also wanted to let you all know that she has a recent report titled Fulfilling America's Future, Latinas in the U.S. in 2015. It was a collaborative project with the Civil Rights Project and the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanics. And when we were chatting this morning, she let me know that, in fact, she was supposed to be at the White House this morning to talk about that report. It's getting some attention. But she actually felt like coming to this conference and talking with teachers and being in the center of this conversation would be a more important place to be at this time. So without further ado, I'll give you Dr. Patricia Gándara.
Good morning. Buenos dias. Thank you, Deb, for that very nice introduction. And thank you for the organizers of the conference. I really do feel very privileged to be here. What a wonderful group of scholars and folks in this very, very important area. I want to begin. We'll see if I can work that. Okay. I want to begin by saying that I am so delighted and really quite humbled by following Ellen's talk yesterday, because it was really, in very large part, her work that stimulated this book. Because we had been tracking for many years, this is, as she pointed out, a real career of work. We've been following this work for a lot of years and finding this increasing body of knowledge around executive function and cognitive benefits of bilingual instruction or dual language instruction. In addition to the work that's been done on the educational benefits, including Fred Genesee, who I also see is here today, And some of the recent work coming out of Stanford, Umansky and Reardon, Steele in Portland, add to that the socio-emotional benefits of bilingual instruction, family cohesion benefits, social adjustment benefits. So this very large body of literature building up around all of these various benefits of dual language instruction or bilingual instruction. And yet, what we've seen is that across the United States, bilingual education is becoming a rarer and rarer commodity. How could this be? Wouldn't every parent, knowing that there are all of these benefits to bilingual and dual language instruction, want to have their child in such a program? What's wrong with this picture? So you might think this is a silly question, the one that I've posed for today's talk. Is there really a bilingual advantage? Or is there really an advantage to, how did I say it exactly, to bilingual instruction? And I think that's really pointed up when we started looking, thinking about this book and what needed to be in it. I was looking at newspaper accounts as well. You know, what do people say about these programs? What's out there? And one comment really captured me, or captured my imagination around this. A mother from North Carolina of a dual immersion student, in which she's quoted as saying, "For me, it was about setting my child up for success. All I could think about is him having a great paying job after finishing high school." And that seemed to sum up really what parents, many parents of children in these programs are thinking, that this is really going to give my child a leg up. My child's really going to be able to do it exceptionally well and make more money, and you know, if they're in a program like this. So we thought, all right, there's this tremendous body of research out there. Maybe most people don't know about it, or for some reason the policymakers don't seem to be compelled by it to make these kinds of programs much more available, as we saw the shrinking bilingual programs in the country. But maybe if we were to talk about the economic benefits, maybe that's the place that's really going to affect people, and they're going to say, well, you know, these other things are great, but like this North Carolina mother, they're going to say, but we need these programs and we need policies to support these programs because they're going to be good for my child economically. In addition to that, while we have seen the shrinking numbers of bilingual programs, we have seen this explosion of dual immersion programs across the country, mostly spearheaded by the monolingual middle class families. But when we went to the literature to see, because first the idea was, I'm sure there are a lot of studies out there that can back up the idea that we should be doing this for economic reasons. So we went to the literature, and actually we were a bit surprised to find that there have been quite a few studies done on this topic, on the economic benefits of bilingualism. And lo and behold, they oftentimes, in fact, almost routinely find that there is no economic benefit to bilingualism in the US. And in fact, there is oftentimes a penalty where bilinguals actually earn less than monolinguals in the US labor market. So if that's the case, then maybe we were wrong. Maybe this isn't the lever to pull in order to change policies to support these students, to support the kinds of programs that would create bilinguals. Maybe people wouldn't want to do this. But as we thought about it more, we thought there must be something wrong with these studies. This does not make sense. You have all of these folks thinking that this is going to be an economic benefit. We have anecdotal evidence that, yeah, individuals who speak more than one language have more job opportunities. What's wrong with this? So we began our process. You know, sometimes I like to talk about this. I don't do a PowerPoint at all. I talk about it as a mystery story. We know that there is an answer out there. How do we get to this answer? But I'm doing a PowerPoint today, so it'll be a little bit different. So we began with a series of studies to try and uncover what's wrong with the prior studies. There must be an error in how they viewed this. We started with Joseph Robinson Simpion. So we commissioned a number of studies to be done. This, by the way, was between the Civil Rights Project at UCLA and the Educational Testing Service actually gave us the funding to study this problem. So we were able to commission a study by Joseph Robinson Simpion, who is now at NYU. And what we asked Joe to do was to look at the studies that had been done. Look to see if there were problems somehow in the sampling, somehow in the methods, and replicate those and see if we couldn't find where this problem might be. So he went to the census data, which virtually all of these economic studies use, and we updated it to the most recent series of American Community Service surveys that were in existence for Latino workers only, so we're holding constant the issue of sometimes viewed as discrimination against particular groups. So these are all Latino workers who are only citizens, to make sure that we don't have in here undocumented folks or people who are at a serious disadvantage in the labor market, and who were between the ages of 24 and 64. And the questions that Joe asked were, are there any employment differences between monolinguals and bilinguals? Are there any earnings differences between them? And are there any gender? People hadn't been looking at this, really. Are there any gender differences in earnings or employment? Maybe that's where we're going to find this. And this is basically logistic regression analyses. What did Joe find using all these controls? And these are quotes. Joe found that male bilinguals earn slightly lower wages than male monolinguals. Although this wasn't true for females. Females were earning pretty much the same. Joe found that male bilinguals participate in the labor market at slightly lower rates. But again, not true for females. And he finally concludes that the most consistent finding is that bilingual and monolingual Hispanic individuals have remarkably similar labor market outcomes. Well, this was not what we had hoped to find. We were sure that there was some problem in the prior analyses that was going to be uncovered by this very carefully controlled study. But we thought, okay, so we didn't find it here. But maybe it depends on the labor sector. Maybe it's where they work that matters. You know, just if you look at all kinds of jobs, you know, maybe that doesn't pick it up. But if we narrow this down to looking at particular kinds of jobs where being bilingual is especially critical, we're going to find the advantage. So study number 2 was done by Alarcón and his associates from the University of Barcelona. This is a very international group that we pulled together. We were looking for people who had really dug into this all over the world. Again, they used the latest US Census data, included individuals who were bilingual or monolingual along, and this is Spanish only, along the US-Mexico border, who had very high public contact in the areas of criminal justice and health, because we figured, okay, these are 2 areas where it really matters if you're bilingual. You have terrible tragedies if police can't communicate with the folks that they're dealing with, and in health, obviously, this can be life or death. And they looked at individuals between 18 and 70. The questions they asked were, will bilinguals in criminal justice and health in a high need area along the border, so we're going to have on a daily basis this need for this bilingualism, will they earn more than monolinguals in that context? And will bilinguals be placed in higher level jobs? In other words, will there be more labor market opportunities for these individuals? In this study, the authors used regression analyses, but also ethnographic interviews, just talking through with people how was it they used their language. So what did they find? No earnings premium for bilinguals. Bilingualism, as they quote, is treated as a freely available, naturally occurring resource of the border. In other words, we just have a lot of people there, and we just take it for granted that they're bilingual. We don't have to do anything special about hiring them or compensating them. Higher level positions, for example, management, were disproportionately held by monolinguals. Other factors trumped bilingualism here. So if you had particular credentials, you were paid more, you were hired more frequently than a person who was bilingual. And so from this study, we concluded that, okay, the problem is clearly that we just simply have too many bilinguals in this area. And so let's go someplace else where there's demand, substantial demand, but not as much supply. So next, Alarcón and his associates took the study. So I should mention that in this border study, this was all along the US-Mexico border. So we looked in Arizona, California, Texas. Took it to Dallas, Texas, because now we wanted to control for the policy environment in Texas, but go to a place where there was still substantial demand, but not as many bilinguals, and still looking in these same areas, health and criminal justice, because we figured these were the key areas. So it's basically the same sample except only for this area. And the questions were, will bilinguals be compensated differently than monolinguals in a moderately high demand area where there are fewer bilinguals in the population? Regression analyses again. The findings? Workers with the highest quality of bilingualism do not receive higher wages than monolingual English speakers. Our findings hold for both border and non-border regions. Spanish speakers with very good skills in English, as they report, experience a decrease of 6% in wages in comparison to monolingual English speakers. Are you sufficiently depressed? Spoiler alert, it's going to get better. Okay, so this obviously set us back on our heels here. That wonderful body of literature that was going to prove the case that there was a great economic benefit to this and was therefore going to have a tremendous impact on policy across the country in support of bilingual and dual language instruction, the studies weren't there. In fact, they find quite the opposite. I will mention to you, too, that this, I understand that this will all be posted. The PowerPoint will be posted at the website, so you don't have to be taking notes. You can look at this later. So we had to go back and we had to rethink this. What happens if we measure literacy? So understand that in the census data, which all of these economists are using, there really is no measure of literacy in the target language, in the non-English language. It's basically, do you speak another language at home? And what happens if we look at different age cohorts? We're not looking at the population as a whole. We're looking at young people that we can follow longitudinally emerging into this new globalizing labor market. So what if we narrow it down to this? And, because census data doesn't tell us about literacy. Could other data tell us more about their actual capacity? Most studies look at workers who've entered the labor market across many different time periods, so we wanted to lop that off and just look at this younger cohort coming in. And then we asked, are there also different questions to be asked? So in this next phase, we ask some new questions with new data that are longitudinal, younger age cohorts, and with measures of primary language and English literacy. Now, you should be starting to feel really good about this, because that's what this dual language education is about, right? It's about literacy. And lo and behold, we find new answers. So the first study is by this wonderful young colleague who's at the University of Leuven now, Orhan Agirdag, and he actually turns the question on its head and says, are there costs to losing one's primary language? Not are there particular benefits, but are there actual costs to what he refers to as language assimilation? The data he uses are the Children of Immigration longitudinal study, which was developed, a data set that was developed by Alejandro Portes and Ruben Rumbaut. And he uses, so I have this asterisk here because in the study that is reported in the book, he's using NELS data. But what I'm going to talk to you about right now is he updates this to the ELS data, which is national longitudinal data sampling across the country, across the US, that is more recent. The findings are the same, by the way, for the NELS, which was begun in 1988 and follows Young People Forward, and the ELS, which is begun in 2002 and updates us. The findings are the same in both of these, except for the monetary value. And so Orhan follows children of immigrants from various backgrounds. This is not, now we're not talking about just Spanish speakers, we're talking about bilinguals from various backgrounds. However, for all of our findings, the findings are basically restricted to Spanish speakers and Chinese speakers, because those are the only places where the N is big enough, where we have enough individuals that we can actually say anything. And both of these data sets allow for the assessment of primary language literacy as well as English literacy. They're longitudinal from high school to the mid-20s. And Orhan used latent class analysis and regression analyses. What does Orhan find? Balanced bilinguals, those who are actually literate in two languages, who have equal ability in more or less equal abilities in both languages, earn about $5,200 more annually at the beginning of their careers. So these are young people emerging into this new labor market, than do monolinguals, and that this holds for different language groups. That is, if you answer the question as he posed it, there is a substantial loss to the individual in earnings as a result of losing the primary language. And we might add, that is a loss in tax dollars that are paid by these individuals who have these higher earnings. To put a final point on that, because the whole notion behind this series of studies is looking at where are the policy levers. How do we get to the policymakers to convince them that this is an important thing to support? And I guess I have to say, Ellen, and it isn't because we think that making more money is more important than cognitive function. But those of us who work in the world of policy understand that sometimes we have to go with what is more likely to give us a result. And I would note, too, that Orhan, at the end of this study, in quotes, he takes a social justice perspective on this and saying, in short, linguistic assimilation policies do not only steal, and that's his italics, do not only steal from people, they steal from those who already have less, because he assumes that these are, well, not only assumes, I mean, that's part of the design, these are the children of immigrants. And children of immigrants in our country and in most countries are at a disadvantage economically. So this is a high cost to these individuals for linguistic assimilation. Let me go on. Next question that we asked is bilingualism related to things that are indirectly related to income? For example, dropping out of high school, occupational status, and then finally earnings. And we asked Rumbaut from the University of California at Irvine to explore this issue. He uses the same SILS data, the children of immigration data that Orhan used, but also he merges it with another data set that he calls the IMLA, the longitude, and these include over 6,000 young adults at the time that we're looking at the outcomes where the average age is 27. So all of these data sets have young people at more or less the same age when we're looking at them. And all of these data sets have followed them through high school and through their post-high school education and into the labor force. These are all from Southern California broadly, and again, from various linguistic backgrounds. He categorizes them into 4 levels of bilingualism: fluent, moderate, those which he calls the balanced bilinguals. Fluents are those individuals who actually have the very highest level of bilingualism, which he's able to do with these 2 data sets because they've been very carefully collected to look seriously at detailed literacy. Limited bilinguals and monolinguals. These are all children of immigrants from various backgrounds, as I noted, and he uses regression analyses. Ruben's findings: monolingual and limited bilingual students are 66% more likely to drop out of high school than balanced bilinguals. So bilingualism is a protection against dropout to a certain extent. Bilingualism is significantly associated with greater occupational prestige, and fluent bilingualism has the strongest effect. Earnings are positively associated with increasing levels of bilingualism. And this is where I think that this study adds something that's important and unique. So he's looking at earnings by the level of biliteracy, and he finds a linear progression. The more biliterate you are, the more fluently bilingual, the greater are the earnings accruing to that. This is getting a lot better, right? Okay. I think Lucrecia is actually in the audience today. I saw her yesterday. Oh, good. Okay, so any questions about this can be answered later. I'm obviously not going into detail about the methods here because this would take us a long time this morning. So questions can be asked later about that, or I will refer you to the actual studies. So Lucrecia asked, does bilingualism affect educational attainment and therefore indirectly earnings? Because of course we know that there's a very strong relationship between your level of educational attainment and your earnings. So this study is done by Lucrecia Santibañez and Estela Zárate, and they use ELS data. So those are the data between 2002 and 2006, national sample, both Spanish and Chinese speaking, the only groups that were had large enough ends. About 16,000 students, approximately 3,000 who are immigrants or children of immigrants from the 10th grade to 2 years out of high school. And they categorize the sample by high-use bilinguals, those who are using the language a great deal in the home and in the community, moderate-use bilinguals, primary language dominant, and English only. And they use regression analyses. What do Santibañez and Zárate find? Spanish bilinguals are more likely to enroll in college than English monolinguals, all else held equal. And it gets better. The odds of, so these are all quotes from the study. The odds of going to a four-year college are higher for high-use Spanish bilinguals. So again, this echoes Rumbaut's finding. The more literate, the more high-use the language, relative to English monolinguals, clearly highlighting the bilingual advantage. Now, this holds true only for Spanish speakers, and no doubt because Asian language speakers are already very, very likely to go to college and very, very likely to go to four-year colleges, whereas Spanish speakers are not nearly so likely to do that. But this is an incredibly important finding, I think, because I'll give you a quick statistic. In the United States, if we look at the different ethnic groups, Asians, more than 60% of Asians, by the time they're 29 years old, get a college degree. About 45% of European Americans get a college degree. About 21% of African Americans get a college degree by this time. And about 15 to 16% of Latinos get a college degree. This spells a policy disaster, an economic disaster for large swaths of the nation, where in Texas, in New Mexico, in California, this is the majority of our kids. And we actually know why, in good part, this happens, because these Latino students are overwhelmingly more likely to go to two-year colleges for reasons of cost and accessibility and others, where they can't get a degree. They can't get a four-year degree. They've got to then transfer out, which rarely happens. So if we find that being a fluent bilingual or being biliterate actually leads to going, for this group of individuals, going directly to four-year colleges, that's a hugely important finding from a policy perspective. That tells us there's something we could do that would make substantial inroads into this problem of undereducation for the population. And then to quote from Santibañez and Zárate, the pressure of linguistic assimilation, in other words, loss of the primary language, reduces the chances to gain a college education, which otherwise would increase their value in the US labor market. So I think that those are some pretty stunning findings. And I had to walk you first through the negative stuff, because you need to know that that is basically what's out there. And if you had gone, like we did, looking for those wonderful studies that were going to prove your point, you would not have found them. And you would have not have found them because the data were inadequate to the questions that were being asked, and because there was not a focus, one, on literacy, and two, on looking at young people emerging into a labor market which has become very global, and in which now, today, even in monolingual United States, there is a high premium on those individuals who can, in fact, operate in more than one language. But we also wanted to find out what employers had to say about language skills. So we surveyed nearly 300 employers across all sectors of the economy. This went on for about 9 months. Large and small firms that were based in California, but many of which had satellites out of the state and that were parts of multinationals. And then we did additional interviews with 10 bilingual workers across these different sectors. I won't go into the methods of that, but you can divide the whole labor market into these different sectors, and we sampled from each one. It is not a random sampling, but it's a sample, a reasonably representative sample, we believe. So the questions we asked here were, do bilinguals have a hiring advantage? Are employers more likely to hire bilinguals? Are bilinguals in certain positions paid more? Going back to the pay question. what's the perceived value of bilingualism by employers, and are there more opportunities for advancement? So what did we find? With respect to the hiring advantage, these are data from 2013. 92% of employers had said in 2013 that they would be hiring in the coming year. So our survey is then based on what they're thinking about their own hiring patterns. And 56% said that they would actually seek out bilinguals. So not just we would hire them, but we're actually looking for them. With respect to where, in what sectors of the economy people were most interested in this, it was in arts, entertainment, recreation, transportation and warehousing, retail trade, healthcare and social services, and educational services. These are the sectors of the economy that were most interested in bilingual employees. Those that were least likely to be looking for bilingual employees were in management and technical services. But even here, still 2/3 of respondents said that they would be interested in having bilingual employees. The bottom line was that across all of these, 66% of employers said that they actually preferred to hire bilingual individuals. So if they had two people who were relatively similar in background or preparation, the preference would go to the bilingual. Are they paid more? This was very interesting because a little more than half of the sample refused to answer that question. We can speculate why that is. I think in part it was because, you get some sense about these things. They did not want to appear divisive, that some of my employees aren't making as much as other employees. But we also suspect that many of these were not paying more and were a bit chagrined by having to answer these questions. But in any case, so the findings that we have are on a little bit less than half of that sample. But of those who did, of the 131 that did answer, 56% said that they do pay more for bilinguals in certain positions. Again, the highest, healthcare and social services, public administration, finance and real estate, and educational services. Do bilinguals have more opportunities for advancement? Between 63% and 80% of employers, so this is back to the full sample, in transportation, manufacturing, construction, finance and real estate, arts and entertainment, and education, said that there was in fact greater opportunity for advancement for bilinguals in their workplace. But this was very interesting. This is where it becomes important to do some qualitative work. Because when we talk to people who are working as, who were biliterate and bilingual in the workplace, and we asked them this question, they responded that, many responded, not all, many responded, well, I am not paid more, I earn more. I've been promoted more, and my job is more secure. So even among those individuals who would, in the corporations and the labor sectors that would not tell us what was going on in terms of their remuneration of their employees, several of these people told us, my bilingual skills allow me to earn more because I have a larger client base, because people prefer to come to me who understands their language and their culture over somebody who does not. My employer knows that I am this critical linchpin between the folks who work here who do not speak English well and management. There were many ways in which these individuals were critical to the workplace and therefore were in fact promoted more, which of course yields higher income, and felt that their jobs were more secure. And this is following on a period in which we were in a real financial crisis, and a lot of people were being laid off, 2007, 2008, 2009. These individuals had survived that because they were so critical. So what do employers say about the value of bilingualism? 64% said that bilinguals provide more effective customer service, where there's this kind of personal interaction. More than half said that they were able to translate documents or help with advertising, things that required literacy. 41% said that they were better able to work in a diverse environment. And 1/4 said that multilinguals create a more welcoming environment. So, to conclude, there are indeed significant benefits, especially to biliteracy in education, earnings, and employment. So now when you need to answer this question, you no longer need to go to all of that economic research that was based on census data that had such an appalling set of findings. I think we have established well that, in fact, there is a tremendous benefit in the labor market to being multilingual, and especially for those younger employees entering the labor market in a more global economy. And especially for Latinos who go on to four-year colleges. And as I mentioned, I've doing research over the decades on the Latino population and what's going on here. This was an especially striking finding for me. I think that there's much we can do with that. And as somebody who has researched bilingual education policy over the decades as well and seen the ups and downs, and mostly downs, of bilingual education with respect to the numbers and percentages of programs that we have out there, this was an especially important finding that transitional bilingual education, which is what we have become used to in this country, bilingual education for the sole purpose of getting students effectively into English, and usually as quickly as possible, it turns out is not the avenue to greater benefits, because this does not promote literacy and does not promote the development of the primary language. So in fact, what we have been doing, and I have to share this because having been in this field for a long time, I've been through those periods in which you didn't even want to say maintenance bilingual education. It was a dirty word. Oh my goodness, we're not doing that, certainly not. Basically what we're doing is we're just using the primary language so we can get these children into English. That was all a big mistake. The payoff comes from maintenance of the home language, and we believe development of other languages and literacy skills. But I warn people that we can become complacent in the US. We can believe that we have these linguistic resources available to us forevermore. And in fact, there has been so much conversation recently about build the wall, we've got to keep those Mexicans out of here. It turns out, and Spanish, of course, is the language of almost 3/4, is the language of almost 3/4 of our bilingual individuals in the US. So this matters a lot. It turns out that the demographics of Mexico are such that we will soon see a decline in the youth population that is available to emigrate from Mexico. And in fact, over the last several years, movement over the southern border has been in the opposite direction. We have lost more Spanish speakers and Hispanic individuals going south than we have brought in going north. So we cannot rely on this steady increase of individuals coming in, at least from the Spanish-speaking world, that we once could. And we know from a lot of studies now that by the third generation, the primary language is pretty much lost. So we're at a period of time in which we have tremendous linguistic resources in this country, in which we could develop all of the high-level, highly qualified, well-prepared bilingual teachers that we need to mount the dual language programs that we could so much benefit by. But we have no time to lose. We really need to turn policy around and take advantage of those linguistic resources while we have them. So to that end, if you want to know all of the details about these studies, the book is with Multilingual Matters, the Bilingual Advantage. There's also, because ETS provided funding for us to do this series of studies, there is an abridged version of this that is available free at that website, which you will actually be able to get because this will be posted. And then I have to mention to you that very last line there. And I noted that there's more than 200 people here that are from California. California is about to vote on whether we are going to, for those of you who are not familiar with this, see if you can wrap your head around this. California, 18 years ago, prohibited by law, not entirely, but almost entirely, bilingual instruction in the state that has the greatest linguistic richness of any state in the country, and also has about 1/3 of all the English learners. In this state, they prohibited bilingual instruction. It's hard to imagine, but this fall, in November, there's the opportunity to vote to change that and to open up more programs for more bilingual programs, which will also facilitate the dual language programs, which are mushrooming in the state. So I have put these flyers out there, they're out there somewhere, about yes on 58. And that very last line is, for any of you who find yourselves on an evening with nothing to do, you can go to this website, and it actually gives you instructions, very, very simple instructions for how to call folks who are likely voters and remind them that this is on the ballot. You'll have the opportunity to increase bilingual and dual language instruction in California. And the reason I'm sort of pushing this is because there's been some polling data recently that people are generally in favor of this in California, but only 17% of the voters knew this was on the ballot. So we are, however you do it. So I put this on here because it's easy instruction and you could call a few people and that would be great. But however you do it, talk about it, let people know. Because what happens in California, unfortunately, tends to travel eastward. And all of our bad ideas have done that in the past. I think it's time that we push a real good idea eastward. So thank you. That's it. And I think we have just a few minutes for discussion.
I can only say, from my personal perspective, this is probably the best feeling I've had for a long time with all this great data, so I'm very grateful.
It's structured so that I get you so depressed at the beginning that you're feeling really, really good at the end.
Yes, I agree. This was a really interesting and very important presentation and set of studies. I want to just flip things around a little bit, given the advantages that you've talked about, and the very important point that the resources to promote that advantage, in a sense, already exist. We've just got to put some effort into keeping that going. But what about monolingual Anglophones? I mean, if it's good for bilinguals, maybe it should be good for monolinguals. Do you see what I mean?
Thank you, Fred. Actually, I do see exactly what you mean, and that would have been the next slide, actually, the research that still needs to be done. Because all of this research is basically done on children of immigrants. It's all targeted towards looking at those individuals who already have the possibility of bilingualism, but because of bad policy, I mean, you know, I'm a policy analyst, right? Because of bad policy, aren't getting those opportunities. But that's really big in my mind as well. what is the difference between being an English monophone and developing a second language, or coming from a family, which as Orhan talks about, where you are linguistically assimilated. We don't have the answer to that. And we could speculate a lot about what that answer might look like. I think it's possible because of, particularly with certain groups, that say a European American individual who acquires a second language would have even greater benefits because there wouldn't be the discrimination that exists among some categories of individuals in the US. But on the other hand, and of course in a good dual language program you are attending to this, but there still is the sense that if you come from this background, you're kind of more familiar with the culture, and that culture piece is really big. It's really, really important. We heard this particularly from the individuals that we interviewed, that I understand your culture, and as a result, you want to be with me if you're doing business with this company. So I don't know, and it's a really, this is, I think, a really, really good question, and it really needs to be the next set of studies.
Am I restricted to ask you in Spanish?
Oh, sí, claro que sí.
Quiero hacer una pregunta acerca de los que están saliéndose de la preparatoria o que no entran a la universidad. Si hay una especie de programas en becas para ellos que les ayuden a seguir adelante.
Una especie de becas. So he's asking if for those who don't go on to college, those who just end at high school, are there certain scholarships or aid that helps these young people to go on to college? Yes, there are. And I would say that, you know, you've heard in the introduction, I do a lot of work with Mexico. And the Mexican government actually does have a becas program that reaches into the US that helps some of these young people who are these biliterates to go on to college. I can give you more information about that later. It's called Becalos. You could also make a comment if you wanted. You don't even have to ask a question. You could.
Hard to stop me once I start. So what kind of, from a policy point of view, what kind of reaction do these data elicit? Are they having the impact that you would like?
Okay, thank you again, Fred, for that. Actually, this is now called, it's Proposition 58 on the ballot in California, and it's called the Learn Initiative. They changed the title halfway through. Nobody consulted me about this. But at the very beginning when it was being formed, I was one of the people who was involved in thinking what this needed to look like. It was called the EDGE Initiative, and the whole focus was on economic value of bilingualism. So at the very beginning of thinking about this initiative, yes, the book and the studies that were done played an important role in being some of the impetus for this. And these studies were consulted because now they knew that we actually do have the data to make the argument. Along the way, it changed names, because I think as a result of polling, that the idea was that, that folks were actually more likely to vote for this if they saw this as being education learn initiative as opposed, I'm not sure what the thinking was there. Like I say, I wasn't consulted, but it did play, it played an important role in the beginning of the formulation of the initiative. And I guess since I have like 1 minute here before we're going to close off anyway, what I would say is that we desperately need, let's hope and assume that, that 58 is going to pass, that it's going to change things in California and therefore have a reverberating impact across the country. We need a bill now to make it, to recruit, to make it easier for people to become bilingual teachers. And by easier, I don't mean lowering standards. I mean making it easier, because many of the people who would become bilingual teachers see that there's a lot of extra preparation, there's extra time, there's extra money, and oftentimes only to get extra work. And so we need to think about this from a policy perspective, what it takes to get more of these young people who are emerging into this new global economy, who have these skills, into the teaching field. And so that'll be my next step. I will be working on trying to get something that looks like an incentive package for bilingual teachers, because that's the piece we really, really need. We can pass a law saying that it's great. Thank you, I'm glad you agree. We can pass a law saying it's great to do these programs, but if we don't have the people to do them, it's not going to make a huge amount of difference. So thank you very, very much. I really appreciate being here with you.